You don't earn your who, you receive it by grace. It's who God called you to be. It's your starting posture, not your finished product. And so this is aspirational as to who I'm trying to be, but it's not an aspirational of like what makes me great. It's what I know God's called me to. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Own It Show. I'm your host, Justin Roethlingshoefer, and I'm super excited for today's podcast because this has just been something I've been percolating on for a long time, and it's quite frankly something that I've put into my new book, Holy Health, and been talking a lot about these frameworks, about what does it actually mean to start with why. And if any of you have been around the personal development space or the growth space for a while, you know who Simon Sinek is and his book Start With Why. But I sat into this and I was like, you know what? My goodness, there is so much more here. Because when we think about Start With Why, there's this concept of being a great idea that leaders and organizations can begin with to identify their purpose and then move into how they do it, which ultimately is what they solve. But what if that's backwards? At least in the context of your life, your health, your identity in Christ. What if that is backwards and upside down because we struggle so much in our health, our life, and our identity with Christ, but we thrive in business? It's because the framework that we're using is actually backwards and upside down, paradoxical, if you will. And so in this episode, I'm beginning with why this is a flawed concept. When it comes to transformation, we have to actually begin with who, and it realigns everything. And so if you're going to go fast, trying to force your health or building from pressure, this message is for you. If you feel like you've tried everything and you know why you're trying to do things, you know why getting on a diet, getting on an exercise routine, getting to bed earlier is something that you care about, but you can't just stick it through, then this is for you. Because this is really going to help get to the core component of what is actually going on and what's actually happening. And so here's what we want to come back to. When Simon Sinek says, start with why, he gets some parts right, but then there's also some parts that fail. When we think about the appeal of the why, how, what model, Simon Sinek gives this amazing TED Talk. If you haven't watched it, it's got like 44 million views. He basically talks about how most businesses start with what they do and then how they do it and then maybe get to the why. But people don't buy what, they buy whys. They buy why you do something. They buy the heart of a business. And so he encouraged everyone to put why at the center. And when your purpose or your why is the driver, how becomes the process and what is the outcome, what you do. And a lot of people resonate with it because the purpose often feels inspiring. It gives motivation. It's beyond the surface level benefits that anybody's going to grab. But it falls short for the inner work, the spiritual work, the health transformation, the thing that holistically holds us together. Why? Because purpose without identity is precarious. If you start with why I must lose the weight or why I must serve, but you don't root in who you are, you may burn out when the motivation fails. And thus you've tried stuff before, you've gone down this road before, you've moved in what you thought was the why before, but it actually didn't get you to where you wanted to go. And you're like, man, maybe I'm broken. Maybe this doesn't work for me. Maybe I'm not supposed to do this. Maybe these are things that aren't aligned with where I'm supposed to go. But it's not actually you, it's the process you've been following. And what ends up happening is when a why first mentality comes into play, it can lead to a performance-driven faith. If your why is tied to what you get, approval, results, validation, certain outcomes, you begin doing Jesus for gain. Meaning it's like, you know what, I'm going to do these things so that I gain something, not because you're loved, not because you are something and you're called to something and there's something that already exists for you. And what it does is it ignores these invisible foundations. Because what this does is this why model, it neglects the invisible foundations. So you can know your why, but if your identity is fractured, your why will crack under the pressure. It will crack under longevity. It will crack under doing things for a long period of time. And in Simon Sinek's world, the human is reduced to a contributor or a function. There's a functionality. There's something you do on a day-to-day basis that gets a certain outcome. But in the kingdom, the human is a beloved child of Christ. You are a daughter, you are a son. That fuller who changes everything. And this is where my argument comes in, is that we have to flip the order. Who goes in the middle? Once you know who you are, you know what to do. Once you know what to do, he'll bring people into your life that will help you know how to do it. And then you will discover your why you were built, why you were created, why you were meant to go on this journey in the first place. And so the first thing we have to do is define your who, because your who is created through identity. Yes, we know you're beloved. Yes, we know you're chosen. Yes, we know you're called. Yes, we know you're the temple of the Holy Spirit, a co-heir with Christ. We know all these things. But what I really want to ask is, who are you? Like, who did he breathe life into you and say, this is who you are? It changed my life because I know who I am. I am a rising tide. I keep tips of the spear sharp. I am a leader of leaders. And I'm a catalyst for change for those who cast major influence and impact. That is what I know God has called me to be, leader of leaders. You don't earn your who, you receive it by grace. It's who God called you to be. It's your starting posture, not your finished product. And so this is aspirational as to who I'm trying to be, but it's not an aspirational of like what makes me great. It's what I know God's called me to. And when I know that, when I know who I am, I now all of a sudden know what to do. What does a leader of leaders do? A leader of leaders shows by example. A leader of leaders is different. A leader of leaders has his priorities straight. A leader of leaders wakes up in the morning at a consistent time and goes to bed at a consistent time at night. A leader of leaders makes sure that he's available. If I'm available, thus I need to make sure I prioritize my time well. If I'm prioritizing my time well, I'm making sure I'm also fueling properly. I'm getting hydrated. I'm having certain types of meals. I don't accept and compromise on the meals that I have. I make sure that I'm giving people and showing people what traveling effectively looks like, making sure that they know the types of food that I eat, the types of exercise that I have. The leader of leaders shows people what rhythms throughout your day look like, with breathwork cycles, with times of stress, with times of relaxation. That is how you structure your day, because not I know what my why is, but rather I know who I am. When you know who you are, you know what to do, because the what flows out of the who. Once you know who you are, what you do aligns more naturally. What I practice, like I mentioned, my movement, my rest, my habits, my spiritual disciplines, they should flow from who I am, who God's called you to be, not out of why you do it. Because then what you're saying is what I am trying to create as an outcome determines ultimately what I do, which is a diet, which is a certain book you have to read. It changes it from I have to I get to. It's language that matters. Because once you know what you do, then there becomes the how. After you know who you are, and after your what becomes aligned with your who, the how becomes more clear. The methods, the rhythms, the tools, and the strategies. And quite frankly, you don't wander trying to figure it out, because God begins to reveal how step by step begins to matter, because you start to move in faith. And he'll have you go into a room and suddenly the person that you needed to execute on the how shows up. Suddenly the coach that you needed shows up. Suddenly the mentor you needed shows up. Suddenly somebody says something that unlocks the how for you. And so these are the things that are really critical for you to know. And once you ultimately know the how to do it, why becomes the fruit. What emerges when who, what, and how are aligned, why is discovered. You walk into why. Man, I just figured out why I did this. I just figured out why I operated this way. And I think a great example, I'll bring Brandon into this, is when we got together about a year ago. He had just come off tour, and his tour was for he was selling out places of bigger churches or smaller venues, 3,000 to 5,000 people. And he had a lot of things going on and pulls on his life, but he was exhausted. He was burnt out. He was fatigued. He was tired, and he knew he couldn't continue on like that. He made an obedient decision. He knew who he was. He's a humble revivalist. So what does a humble revivalist do? A humble revivalist prepares his body, prepares his mind, prepares his spirit to be able to pour out. Make sure it's not about him, but it's about who he's doing this for. And thus he lives a lifestyle that's aligned with that, from his family, from his body, from his daily habits, from his rhythms. And how he was able to get there? Well, I came into his life to be able to help implement this. And why did we finally figure this out? Because now he's selling out 20,000 seat stadiums. He's playing to hundreds of thousands of people, and the pull on his life is even greater, and thus if he didn't have the resilience, he wouldn't be able to handle it. And so when you move faithfully, God reveals the deeper purpose and meaning that sustains you to continue to keep it going. And it creates a faith posture that says, I may not know why yet, but I believe in the one who has named me who I am. Thus I will continue to walk in those day after day. When you start with who, then the walk by obedience becomes the default, becomes the design, becomes the thing that you lean on. Then God opens up the why piece by piece. It's not something that he reveals all at once. It's something that over the course of time begins to happen. And so applying this in this health transformation is so critical. We have to have identity-driven health. Instead of I exercise because I want to lose weight, which is the why, say I move because I am a steward of God's temple. I move because I am a generational shifter. A generational shifter who has had obesity in their life for many generations. I'm a generational shifter. Thus, I know who I am is going to bring me into something new of what to do. I exercise because I'm a generational shifter. This shift reframes failure, rest, relapse, so that your identity is not tied to the outcomes, but rather your rootedness in who God's called you to be. Thus, it creates sustainability. And so when the identity-driven health comes in, the who is at the forefront. And I talk about this so much in Holy Health, and Holy Health actually has a section in it called Holy Breath that's going to be turned into a book right after it. But breathwork becomes a gateway to the who. And in our most recent Redeemed event, we did a lot of this breath work that revealed who people were, and they were able to get really clear to this. Because breath is a physiological bridge between spirit and body. It starts each health practice with a few deep breaths, reminding you, I exist because God breathed life into me. I don't earn my identity. I am who God says I am. And the breath aligns that. We did so much breath work in this last Redeemed event, and it allowed us to go back and listen to what God says so we can be obedient to what He's next, so that we can gain wisdom for who He says we are. And I talked about this a lot in this podcast called Slow, giving you the slow sequence. Stillness gives you the chance to listen, so you have the opportunity to be obedient to gain wisdom for what to do next. And it's that system that hushes the hustle and aligns you inwardly before you actually act outwardly. And it gives you just this powerful way to, again, connect with who God's called you to be. And that leads us into understanding an example, an illustration. Because I want you to just imagine somebody. I've given you some examples of myself and Brandon, but imagine someone named Sarah. She begins each morning with 3 minutes of breath work, declaring, I am beloved, I am God's daughter, I'm His temple, I am chosen. And then she picks one small health practice. Maybe it's walking, stretching, a protein-rich breakfast, not because she must, but because it's an act of stewardship flowing out of who she is, out of who God's called her to be. And over time, these methods, the how, the system that is built, the rhythms that are built in her life get better. They get more locked in. She learns what foods, what workouts, what real strategies suit her. And then her deeper why becomes clear: to serve others, to be the example for my family, to reshape my generational tree. This is how this actually starts to work. And it allows us to resist this rushing that I think we often look for in results. And I want to remind you that this process takes time. Getting deep cannot be skipped. I talk about that in that acronym SLOW. The slower you go, the deeper you get. The deeper you get, the faster He can move. And so abiding takes time. Depth cannot be skipped. If you skip depth, you will always forego quality. And the temptation is to chase big why statements. Big why statements that Simon Sinek has sold us on. But when we chase big why statements, it oftentimes holds us back from understanding who we're doing it for, which is Christ through us. And these grand visions, these immediate results, they often lead to burnout because they bypass the who. And so the paradox of this is the slower you go in aligning your who, the deeper you get, and the deeper you get, the faster your results begin to merge naturally. And so when we think about this, I want you to step into 3 things that I just need you to be aware of. I think we often abuse the why and the over-clarity trap, because some people demand clarity before acting, using why as a barrier to obedience. That becomes procrastination disguised as purpose. I don't know what my why is yet, so thus I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to wait here. But while others churn through whys, trying new missions, new goals, without ever rooting in the who, it always ends in fatigue. And so we have to know who we are. It's another reason why this matters. Not allowing your why to be the hurdle that you're actually trying to get over from. Some people demand complete clarity before acting, using why as a barrier to obedience, that ultimately becomes procrastination disguised as purpose. And while others churn through whys, their missions, their new goals, without ever rooting in who, becomes laced in fatigue.